Hello everyone. It is the 28th of January 2023, which means that at the time of recording we are deep into album writing and sort of album pre-production, stuff like that. But at the same time, our gig calendar for this year is quickly filling up. I think we've got 4 gigs confirmed, and we're looking into a handful of others as well, which is really exciting. I love playing live. It's not always easy for us to organise doing these sorts of things because we're spread all over the country, but when we do, it's always a great time, and it's some of the most rewarding parts of doing what we're doing. Along with that, it's got me thinking about my live setup, specifically the parts that I am unhappy with. It's not all bad. I think there's a lot of parts of my current setup which work really well, but yeah, I think it's going to be best just to show you what I'm working with at the moment, and then we can move on to how I think things could be improved. So my current onstage setup consists of my guitar going into an M-Audio interface. It's just a home studio interface. I was just going to buy another Focusrite, but the Scarlett 2i2 does not have MIDI capability, which I need for the Behringer FCB 1010 MIDI controller, and that's how I'm, controlling all of my patch switches and stuff like that. So that's going into the interface as well, and then the interface is just USB'd into a MacBook Pro currently running Bios FX 2. I think the reason I chose Bios FX to begin with was it's just the sound that I used on the album. I think I used one of the Bios amps, and so I've got Bios amp and Bios FX both installed on there, and I've got the Pro version of Bios FX as well, which you need in order to have external MIDI capability, basically. And I can just change patches within Bios FX on stage with my feet, with the foot controller, which is great, and it's amazing, except for... So here is where the problems lie with this current setup. First of all, the patch switching is not immediate. So I've got my guitar plugged in here, and it's great. It's really responsive. I find that Bios FX does have really good latency. It doesn't use a lot of processing power at all, and it's really solid, basically, which is great for the really tight sort of chuggy playing. But the patch switching itself is, if I switch quickly between 2 patches here, there's a kind of fade in, like it when you switch to something that should be really high gain, it starts off not very high gain, it sort of fades in. It's very subtle, but it's there, and I don't want it there, and that's one thing that I think needs to be fixed. The other thing that I think needs to be fixed, and this is a big one, this is sort of a key point of discussion amongst, live guitarists, is what is the best way to preserve delay and reverb tails from patch to patch. To give an example, I've got a patch here with a load of delay on. If I switch from that to a patch without delay, it will, well, you'll see what happens. It's gone. It kills it completely. And that's just really irritating. I think it interrupts the flow of the music quite significantly. It's just something that I would really like to take my live sound to the next level, just to sort of give it that production sheen that ties it all together. So after quite a bit of research into a couple of options, I found a program called Gig Performer. And the main upgrade that this has over something like Bios FX is that the possibilities and freedom that you have when it comes to your signal chain are much, much larger. So Bios FX really sort of limits you to one lane. I think you can do a little bit of splitting, but really it's what Gig Performer allows is multiple inputs, multiple outputs, sort of send loops, effects loops, and the ability to automate between them very seamlessly, like very, very seamlessly. On top of that, it has the ability for you to create your own set list. So you can have a song and then put all of the patches that you need for that song in order, and also put the songs in order. So you could potentially play the whole show just pressing one button, just going next patch, next patch, next patch, and then next song, and then you keep going through the patches like that. I'm intrigued by this. It looks to be really powerful, and what I'm going to do today is do some investigation into the functionality that it has, and basically just try to get the whole thing working. And then I'll talk you through what I found and some of the solutions that I've come up with. Another massive reason to upgrade from Bios FX to something else would be the ability to use third-party plugins. Bios FX does have some really good effects available, but there's nothing like working with the tools that you're used to working with inside of a DAW and, you know, being able to take that sound exactly and use it in a live setting. So one of the things I've discovered so far is that you can create variations on a signal chain that you've got, something like this. And so what I was talking about before with sort of, you know, creating send effects so that you can switch between having a delayed sound or a reverb sound to not having that sound without cutting off the tail. What you would do in the studio is you would send the signal to a separate channel with the delay on, and then when you're done sending it, you'd take the signal away, you'd take the send away. And that allows the channel with the delay on to continue, but everything else coming from the source will not have that delay applied to it. So that's the world that I'm from, and that's kind of the approach that I've taken to it here. So I've got the signal coming in at the top, and I've got the Archetype Gojira plugin by Neural DSP as my core sound here. And then I'm splitting the output from that amp into 3 different channels. So I've got a dry output, which is going to go straight to the output, to the interface, and then that's going to go to Andy and front of house and so on. But I'm splitting off into a couple of different places. I've got a delay output, and I've got a reverb output, and I've just set it up how I would in the studio. It's been really intuitive for me. So how do you actually use this in a live setting? Well, so what Gig Format allows you to do is to create a panel, I think they call it. And what you can do is you can drag on your own widgets like this, like a slider, and then anything in here, basically any parameter that the developer of a VST allows you to have control of. You can link your widget here to any parameter. So for these, I've linked them to the audio mixer, so this audio mixer here, and I've got one for the dry, for the delay, and for the reverb. So that, in the case of the wiring, is going to be the dry, the one that's going to the reverb, and the one that's going to the delay. And I can just move those up and down for each patch as I want. And how that works with a MIDI controller is, so this one's called the default variation, where it's just going to be dry and delay and no reverb. And then I create a second variation where I want a bit of reverb. So I'll dial that in, I'll turn up the delay to the amount that I want it to be. And then when I switch between these, you can see the slider is jumping up and down. So this is effectively a send slider. And yeah, I can just, well, let's grab a guitar and see if it works. Okay, so we've got our default tone here. No reverb, no delay, nothing like that. And so we'll switch to our variation with the delay on. Let's just turn that up just to make it really obvious. So if I just make a bit of noise, get some delay going, and then what I'll do is I'll switch back to the default channel. The slider went down, but the sound continued because all we're doing is changing the send. So that's the power of sends in the studio, and I'm applying the same principle here. And I can keep playing, and that delay is still in the background. So let's do the same with the reverb. Let's just bump that up just to make it really, really obvious. Which is perfect. It completely solves the reverb, delay, effects tail problem in general. So what I think I'm going to do now is figure out the best way to set this up so it uses as little CPU power as possible. So I'm using as few plugins as possible, just to make sure that I keep that latency down really low. So I've actually got a notes file with all the patches that I need for all the songs that we're playing live. The ones that are numbers are just sort of like the default patches. So I've got like a default high gain tone, a default clean tone, and those are basically just patches that I use multiple times throughout the set, and there's no point in creating more than one patch for those. So yeah, these are the patches that I've got to make. I'm just going to take a minute to talk about how much I actually love this kind of work. I'm an engineer by trade, that's my day job, and it involves, a huge amount of problem solving and, finding optimal solutions for things. When I combine it with my love for, being creative and creativity and producing music, it's the perfect combination of both of those things I love, the creative part and the technical, problem solving ability part. It's just, anyway, back to the video. Okay, so I've just finished making all the patches that I need for the song Union. By no means are the sounds that I've put together going to be the final sounds, but I just wanted to put together the sort of proof of concept of how the patch switching will work, just so I can get my head around it. And yeah, I'm really impressed so far. If I just switch through some of the patches quickly. Pretty seamless. The tiny glitches you'll hear are just due to the processing power. This MacBook is getting on in years a little bit, and if I bump the sample rate up, you get less of those. But for practical purposes, you want that sample rate to be as low as possible to have the least latency between your playing and what's coming out. But yeah, you can hear with the delays and reverbs that I was talking about before. If I've got the clean patch for the intro to Union here. And then I can play that and I can switch on to the riff. And the delays and stuff are still there from before. And yeah, again with sort of lead parts. I can head into the riff after that. And the delay tail stays there. The only thing to do now is to make sure that my MIDI controller works with it, but I had a little bit of play around off camera, and that seems incredibly easy to set up. Literally, as long as the interface can see the MIDI controller that you've got plugged in, you just hit the action that you want to link to a button, and then you hit the button on the controller, and it links it, and it's done. And it's probably the easiest thing I've ever actually had to do with MIDI. So yeah, I'm going to chalk this up to being a great success. I'm really looking forward to actually making the rest of the set and getting all the patches together. And I think I'm going to feel a lot more confident on stage than I was with the previous setup. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in whatever I put out next.